Alrighty, well, welcome one and all to our presentation regarding Social Security's disability program. Um, for folks who will be attend or watching this later, we thank you for taking the time on it. This program or this presentation will be going over effective ways to self-advocate when applying for Social Security disability benefits or appealing denial. Really quick, just want to do introductions for today's presenters. Ty, do you want to start off?
Hi everyone, my name is Ty. I legally changed my middle name to Erd to have a license to be tired. I am Atlantis's benefits planner, WIP-C. I've received training to help people better understand how their benefits may be impacted by working. And as a result, I've learned a lot about the hidden rules that Social Security loves to have.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Samuel Trout, but you can call me Sammy. And I was a former disability case manager for a Social Security law firm. In that position, I handled cases from the initial stage up until we appealed to get to an administrative hearing. And I worked with I'd say about 150 different clients throughout the state of Colorado, as well as a couple here and there throughout the United States. So this is something I'm pretty hands-on work on experience with. So thank you all for attending. I know Social Security disability law is such an interesting topic, but it's an important one. And I think with a lot of the systems that are confusing for folks, I think having a kind of a general overview of how the process is going to be really helpful for folks. Just a quick disclaimer before we jump right into it. The information contained in this presentation is for informational purposes and should not be construed as legal advice. There are Social Security law firms that exist throughout the state of Colorado. This is a very intense bureaucratic sense of law. It's one of the biggest fields of practice for administrative attorneys here in the United States. And so I just want to be very careful that the information in here is just a general overview and me not giving any legal advice or Ty not giving any legal advice. So if you have specific questions about your claim or anything about what's going on there, please reach out to a disability attorney. Near the end, we'll go over the benefits of having legal representation throughout this process, as well as some good starting points for referrals. Okay. So before you apply for disability benefits, it's really important that you get your ducks in a row. And so a couple of things is knowing what benefits you're applying for, knowing what you have to prove in order to get approved through disability, what to expect with the process, timeline especially, and then again, benefits of seeking out legal representation. And that's going to be a big thing that this presentation will be answering, I hope. So that's kind of stuff that you should know kind of before you jump into this process. Okay, so the big things is the three different programs, technically a half of a program near at the bottom, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. So there's two main programs when it comes to Social Security disability. There's Social Security Disability Insurance, known as SSDI, and Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. The big differences between these two is what you qualify for. But once you actually apply for these programs, they go through the same kind of steps administratively. So this is just getting your foot in the door in terms of what you will be applying for. So SSDI is the one that most of the clients that I worked with apply for, and this is based off of your work experience. One of the first questions that they will ask you when you go through this is, what is your work history? And one of the requirements is that you've worked 5 out of the last 10 years in a job that pays into Social Security. Something, especially for, Colorado, for educators or state employees, things to consider is if your job is paying into Social Security or going into para. If it's para, that's a separate program from Social Security, and that work experience won't count under that. So it's really important that, again, when you're getting your ducks in a row, figuring out, was my job paying into Social Security? One of the ways that you can check that before going into it is if you make a My SSA account. I always encourage my clients to do it. Well, I didn't see the back end of that, so I don't know what that looks like user-wise. We found that it was very helpful for getting notifications to seeing what sort of updates would go on. Again, checking to see if you had the credits for it, and it would give you an approximate benefit amount. I say approximate because obviously there's a little bit more to that, but it gives you a good idea in terms of if you are to be approved, what that benefit's going to look like.
I've actually
Um,
made, oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I've actually made and utilized my Social Security accounts myself. In addition to giving you an approximate amount, if you're shy credits, it will let you know about how many credits you have and how many you might need for both SSI retirement and SSI disability. Um, and like Sammy said, or if you are needing additional documents or you need verification of documents, or if they are sending you stuff, they should be also, after you make that account, they should also be sending it to your My Social Security account. And I highly recommend it because I've worked with so many people who get their documents 1 week or 2 weeks before it's due. And it's just a lot easier for them to check every couple weeks there and have a lot more time than it is to wait in the mail and have the mail get to them or maybe not get to them at all.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ty, for expanding on that and giving information that, all of the stuff that MySSA has, their account and their app and all of that sort of stuff is really, really helpful. And it's not even something that's super complex. I know for a lot of my clients and for folks going through this process, technology may not be your thing. Totally understandable. MySSA is a very accessible site that's helpful for that sort of information. So the other program that they have is SSI. And the main program with this one is it is a needs-based program. So while SSDI is going to see if you're qualified based off your work credits, SSI is going to be looking at your assets. So that's going to include, what sort of wages you or anyone who lives with you makes, assistance with room or board, etc. Social Security is very strict on those in terms of what qualifications you have on that. So it's really important that you have that understanding and a good thing for that. In terms of how much you can get from each program, they're a little different. So we'll start off with SSI first, because that one is pretty straightforward. The maximum payment you can get for SSI is $994 a month or $1,491 per month for eligible couples. Now, I know that's not a lot of money, and it's really not. Again, this is a needs-based program that Social Security has. The main, again, kind of seeking for that. SSDI, meanwhile, is a little different because, again, it's based off of what you've paid into. So that's why that approximate benefit amount that you see through your MySSA account is going to be really helpful because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like on, at least on my end. And then furthermore, we don't really know what you get fully paid out to until you get payments. All right. And then oh,
I,
yes, do you
I
want me to add them?
I just wanted to say a
Okay.
couple things, if I may.
Yeah.
For people who are eligible couples who are receiving SSDI, there is an additional benefit, Colorado uh, um, A&D, Aid to the Needy and Disabled. I believe it is CS, and that is if your Social Security payment is never the full amount, for like overpayments or for like the couples. So both couples could request that and then eventually get their full amount. So even though it's SSA, Social Security Administration is cutting it in like into a quarter, you can still get your full SSI payment. And welcome, Lisa. We're recording this message. If you could wait until the end for questions so we could pause the recording, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And welcome, Lisa. So we're just kind of going over SSDI versus SSI, and kind of the main differences between those two. Um, So for the last program that we have on here, it's kind of a half program where it's disabled adult child program. This is similar to SSDI, and again, it goes through the process like SSDI, but instead of your work credits being based off of your work experience, it's based off of a parent or guardian's work experience if they are retired, deceased, or also on disability. Um, DAC cases, I don't have a whole lot of experience working on them, truth be told. They're pretty rare, at least from when I was working on them. And they're more, again, a little complicated throughout that because they're looking at different profiles. But again, once you apply for those, they go through the same process. They'll go through or look for your medical records and all that sort of stuff. So a little bit different there. Again, SSI and SSDI go through the same examination process. It's just a matter of which one you qualify for, and that's going to be the big determining factor. I didn't add it on here, but you can apply for both at the same time. There's nothing stopping you. Excuse me. And in fact, the Social Security encourages you to apply for both at the same time. If you are to be awarded both, essentially your SSI payment will kind of go down based off of what your SSDI payment will go up to. So if you get your SSDI, you're basically awarded SSDI and not necessarily SSI, kind of cancels out. But if you don't get SSDI but then still get SSI, it's still payments there. So just a question for that. Go ahead, Ty.
So, my understanding is that Social Security will default to SSDI. However, is if the SSDI amount does not cover the supplemental need of SSI, you will get both. And the process, like Sammy says, when you apply for one, you're kind of actually applying for both. And Social Security will look for whatever is most advantageous to you. They will not give you a low of whatever they can. They have to give you the bare minimum, which is SSI.
Hmm.
As a benefits planner, I will say there is vast differences between SSI and SSDI. In some cases, SSI can be a huge advantage. Like if you have a visual impairment, there is the BWEs, the blind work exclusions that only apply for SSI. And you can get things like your taxes not counted as your income, which is crazy to me. Well, SSDI has a lot of really good incentives too. For SSDI, they don't count money that you earn for work you didn't perform. So if you have a job that has PTO, vacation, sick leave, all that money isn't really counted as countable income for the determination of if you go over what is known as sustainable gainful activity. And there's other benefits and incentives that SSDI has. So it is possible to be on both. I've been on both. But Social Security will try and default to whatever is most beneficial to that person. Um, with them always defaulting to SSDI first.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that insight, Ty. I appreciate it and for giving that extra context as well. Okay. Now, in terms of how to apply for each, again, as they're different programs, there's a little bit of a different process for them. So we'll start with SSDI. There is a website that you can go to. It's ssa.gov/apply for disability. But of course, if you Google SSDI, it'll give you that application as well. The nice thing with this one, it's a little bit easier to do, and you can apply for SSI at the end as well. It'll give you like another section to fill out, which is really simple to fill out, and then they'll do all the work for you. So it's really helpful in that way. If you're applying for just SSI, that is something that you have to do directly with Social Security. And again, the big reason for that is because for SSI, they want to know a more extensive history of your current assets. So they'll ask you a ton of questions of, what sort of, obviously, what's in your bank account, but they'll also ask if you're on any trusts or funds. I had a client who was on the Black Lung Fund, which is something I hadn't heard of until I did Social Security. And so those are things that they want to go through, and they're going to have a lot more of that kind of hands-on knowledge. If you do get an attorney at this point in the process, so before you apply, they will fill that application out with you. And that I find to be very helpful, as some of the questions or some of the things on there can be a little confusing. And they also know some insider tips and tricks that I'll get into here in a little bit, that make the process a little easier and more advantageous for you. If you're applying for disabled adult child, you have to apply with Social Security directly. That's what we encourage. Again, if you get an attorney, they can help you apply for that online. But again, because they are looking at a parent or guardian's work experience and all of that, it's just a little bit more complicated to do online. So they really recommend that you apply through SSA. So yeah. So what you need to know to prove in order to be approved. So Social Security's definition of disability, there's a couple of things that you need to know before, in order to be approved. One is that you have to show that you have the inability to engage is what known as substantial gainful activity or SGA. Ty kind of mentioned that a little bit before. This is something that changes every year, but as of 2026, that gainful limit is $1,690 per month or $2,830 per month if you're blind. Now, I want to put a pause on here and acknowledge that that sucks. This is the SGA limit that Social Security sets is nationwide. It is not something that it necessarily accounts for individual states or cities. Getting 17,000, having $17,000 a month is not sustainable in the state of Colorado, like anywhere. Even in some of the rural areas, this is not really enough for folks to live. So I understand that this is something that sucks. It's basically if making you poor while you go through this process. Social Security, again, is very strict on it. They don't want you to be having this as a side fund, as a, oh, I'll, use this to go shopping or whatever. I know that's not what people are applying for with these programs, but that's one of the reasons for that. Also, Social Security is just really behind in terms of how they do that math and whatnot. As you'll find out, Social Security is very bureaucratic and slow. Um, so I understand that's something that is very limiting. Additionally, they'll also be looking at to see if you aren't able to work because of your disabilities, either through physical or mental impairments, and these have to be formal diagnoses. I had a conversation with a client once who was confused. He's like, no, 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 I'm not doing a mental case or a mental disability case. I'm doing a physical disability case. A big part of it is through these cases is seeing how they mesh with each other. It's not one or the other. It's usually both. If you have PTSD due to your time in combat, for example, and you have physical disabilities because of that, those play an integral role. And that's something that Social Security would actually benefit from knowing how those disabilities impact each other. Um, so that's something that I think some folks get confused on in the process is one or the other, or I can get it through this way. It's a little trickier than that. Additionally, Social Security is looking to see if you're getting consistent treatment with providers. One second, Ty, I'm sorry. Is getting consistent treatment with providers. If you have consistent treatment with providers, it shows that this is something that is actively impacting you and something you're needing active treatment on, recognizing that you are going to providers instead of being able to work. It's also helpful because that getting treatment from your providers and having that medical history is what Social Security relies on when they go through their examinations, which again, we'll kind of get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty here in a little bit. But if you're like, oh, I haven't seen a doctor in 5 years, 10 years, it's gonna be a lot trickier to have to win those cases and to kind of get there because again, they're relying on the information as you go through the process. Go ahead, Ty.
I just want to echo you, Sammy, when you're talking about how it's not one or the other. For the purposes of benefits planning, if you have something that may benefit you that you pay for in order to work, that it has to be related to your disability for an IRWI. And if you don't have that disability listed with Social Security, you can't claim it as an IRWI. So that is a good reason why to have both. Another good reason is after you're approved, you need to continuously demonstrate the need in which you need this. So let's say if you get into a car accident and you require physical therapy, but after 2 years you're able to walk again, but you have maybe some trauma associated with that. Um, After 2 years, if you only applied for a physical disability and your disability is gone, they may say that you need to reprove yourself or you'll be terminated because you don't have the level of need that you initially applied for. So there are reasons to try and get as many reasons as you can. And another thing I just really would like to say is I I think it's really important to talk about, and they have it listed here and there, how it significantly impacts your daily living. Um, my my depression is not the same as everyone else's depression. My pain is not the same as everyone else's pain. And the person who is making the determination, the person who is reviewing your paperwork, if they don't understand what you mean when you say it hurts to walk, then they may not think that you've provided enough information. So when you're setting up these applications, when you're submitting documents in paper, try and be as detailed and give them as much information as a stranger would need in order to make a determination for you on how it significantly impacts your daily living. Make sure that if it's preventing you from standing up for more than 20 minutes, you say that. Because if you say that I'm in pain, they're just going to say, well, you haven't experienced childbirth. You don't know what pain is, and walk away. I just want to include that. Thank you, Sammy.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Ty. Um, okay. So self-advocacy tips when you're applying, and this is just helpful throughout the entire process. It is not your job to collect and submit medical information or vocational evidence. Social Security will do that for you. So one of the forms that they will send out after you complete, or if you're with Social Security directly, one of the forms that they will send out is basically a HIPAA form that says, can we access your medical records? And what will happen there is that they will send out records requests to the providers that you give to Social Security, which gets us into our next section, is that it is your job to provide all of that contact information of all the hospitals that you've seen, all the specialists you've seen, practitioners, anyone who has had a role in your medical history going through it. And they can only go back so far. I want to say it's about 10 years, but I could be wrong in that. So that, if you have records all the way back from like 2001, you can put that in. That's certainly helpful, but they can only statutorily only go back so far. Um, Something that I found that was very helpful, that helps streamline the process, is when you're putting that in, there's a whole dedicated section to where you're getting your providers from. I would only put in the hospital name and the location, or the location, whether it's hospital or clinic. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, if you're seeing multiple providers at, let's say, the UC Health, that's the Anschutz location. Let's say you have multiple primary cares and providers or specialists or whatever throughout that hospital. It's easier just to put in and say, I get treatment from here, and it'll give you a section of what sort of treatment are you receiving from here. So you can put in primary care, specialist care, all of that sort of goodies in there. Additionally, it's helpful for when Social Security is putting in their records request because they will put in that specific person. So let's say, for example, you had Dr. Jill for 5 years. She was, throughout your entire kind of beginning of the process, really understands it, but she retired last year. They'd be able to get that information. But let's say you had Dr. Gary beforehand, but he doesn't work there anymore. That might be harder for them to find. Or if there's a doctor that is like, it was so long ago, I don't remember their name. So this allows them to pull at records based off of just saying they've received treatment from this facility. And that it just streamlines the process. And when you're filing the application, if you're putting in individuals, it gets repetitive very quickly. So it just helps streamline the process for you. Make sure that your doctors, therapists, and counselors that they are up to date with all the ways that your disability impacts your activities, and have them write letters of support. We would have it all the time at our office saying, "Hey, if you have a specialist who would like to write in detail, it's not gonna be the smoking gun necessarily. Examiners will take that evidence and will certainly consider it. It's not going to be the thing that confirms your case, but it is very helpful for evidence while you're going through it, especially when we get to the hearing process, which we'll kind of touch on those here in a little bit. And then we'll go over work background and all of that. But when you're filling out the application, make sure to be as detailed as possible. When you're talking about your medications and your work background in terms of why you can't work anymore, there are sections for that. And at the remarks section, if you run out of space for anything, that's a great place to put it in. That would be basically a mini section or mini application for some of the clients that I was working on because of how much detail we needed to go into. So the remarks section is there for a reason. If there's anything that you want to add for them to consider, please, please, please fill that out. Okay. So stage one is the initial application. So after you've applied for SSI, SSDI, or both, your application will be sent to your local Social Security office to be processed. And that can be found on Social Security's website, and that's based off of your zip code. Aurora has one, Denver has one, Colorado Springs has one, Pueblo, most of the cities and towns have one, or have one that takes place ones in that region. Once they have it processed, which can take them about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on backlog, throughout that process, they are just looking at it at a technical aspect. Was this filled out correctly? Is the Social Security number correct? Is there, information that we can verify really quickly? And then they send that off. Sometimes if there's any weird stuff, they will contact you. And I think I have this mentioned, yeah, later in the slide. Social Security will only really contact you via mail. And if they contact you by phone, that's pretty rare, just because they don't typically do callbacks or anything like that. But unless you've set up an appointment with them, but they will not just call you, they will not send you an email or anything like that. If you do get a phone call that sounds weird or an email from Social Security besides like my SSA account notifications, either report it to your legal team or contact the Social Security Inspector General. They do all the fraud investigations there. Um, so once Social Security has processed your claim, they will send it over to a state agency known as Disability Determination Services, or DDS, which we'll go over here in a little bit. Uh, Actually, next slide. So what is DDS? DDS is a state agency out of the Colorado Department of Human Services that makes the decisions or medical examinations on behalf of Social Security. So they do this work through their disability examiners. I want to add a quick little thing here. In the state of Colorado, there are two agencies called Disability Determination Services, one out of Human Services and one of the Healthcare and Financial Policy Department. The HCPF, Disability Determination Services, handles Medicaid and Medicare and all of that sort of stuff. So they don't relate to your claim, but they may kind of play intertwined with that. So just be sure when you're getting correspondence through DDS to make sure you're checking to see what department this agency is under, just to avoid any confusion. Um, Now, waiting for an examiner to be assigned to your case, that is what takes the longest for this entire process. And I want to give context to that. Average wait times in Colorado for initial claims to be assigned is anywhere between 3 to 6 months. It may be longer, it may be shorter. It really just kind of depends on the circumstances of your case. DDS is one office. Some states have multiple offices, and most of them have one. And they have a dedicated staff of about 50 examiners throughout that office. And every year they receive about 40,000 claims a year throughout the state of Colorado. So on average, most of those examiners have a caseload of about 800 different cases. Is that sustainable? No. Does that, make things difficult? Yes. But it explains a part of as to why these claims take so long to process. Um, this map kind of shows the wait times for SSDI applications as of September 2023. As you can see here, I'm not entirely sure why it's broken up into two sections because, again, there's only one office in Colorado. I think this is just for general regions, but it is a very lengthy process of about 471 to 555 days. I think that's the time, or yeah, about days, give or take. That's not entirely accurate as of now, but it shows just like how complex it is between on different areas. And you'll see areas that have more offices are able to provide that. But again, DDS is a state agency. That's how it's written in federal laws, that this has to be a state agency determination. And each of these state agencies have their own funding limitations, all that sort of stuff. So things just to keep in mind when you're applying for it. I know when I would make calls to folks to give updates, I would give them every 2 months or so. And during this process, a lot of my phone calls would go, the update is, there is no update. So that's something to keep in mind. While you wait for that to happen, that doesn't mean that things can't happen in the meantime. So obviously continue your treatment plans with your primary specialists, et cetera, and let them know that you've applied so that they can be more active in terms of what you need from them. You can also update DDS and your legal team if you have one on any updates regarding your medical, educational, work, or vocational status. A lot of the times when I would give calls, even if I didn't have a DDS update, I would call and say, has there been any changes to your medical history? Have you gotten any new medications? Have you had any new diagnosis? Have you had a surgery that we talked about at your initial application? These sorts of things. They have specific forms that you can fill out, and it's helpful to keep them updated as you're waiting, so that they have that information when an examiner is assigned. Really importantly, do not send updates to Social Security when it's been signed to DDS, and you'll get a letter in the mail that says it's been sent over to DDS. It is so important that you don't send it to Social Security because they have a likelihood of losing it. They will say they send it over and it will take them a long time because that's low on their priority list. So if you have updates, send them to DDS. If you have a legal team, send your updates to DDS or to your legal team and they will send it to you on your behalf. Go ahead, Ty.
I have more of a question because I hear it all the time. what if you're like relying on these benefits, you become homeless and your address change? Like, is it
Mm.
DDS the people? Because I know Social Security needs to know, but who do you let know if you are no longer housed and or your housing situation's changed?
That's a fantastic question. My best recommendation, in terms of what I would do when I had those sorts of updates, is I would notify both. So I would send a letter to Social Security and to DDS notifying them. I would also get in contact with the staff there and notify them that way so they had a record of that as well. So when it's stuff such as your contact information or your housing situation, I would recommend contacting DDS first, but absolutely notify Social Security in case they sent you anything else, or when claims kind of go through it. It's good just to notify them both. Social Security will likely just send it over to DDS, but you'd rather have them over document than under document. And we kind of talked about this before also, but ask your medical team for letters of support, and saying like, hey, can you give a summary of my treatment plan here? And, what's your professional opinion, all that sort of stuff. So those are some of the things that you can do while you wait. But I like to call this point stage 1.5 because this is when we really get into the meat and potatoes of the process. So being assigned to an examiner, once you're assigned, you will get a letter notifying you that you've been assigned. They'll give you the name and phone number of your examiner, and this will be the person that will kind of go through it. Your examiner will send you one of two things as you go through it. One, they will send you a function report and a work history report. A function report will allow you to go into more detail as to how your conditions impact your daily activities and your ability to work. So it will go into a lot of detail of like, can you use the restroom by yourself? Can you shower by yourself? Do you cook? Do you do all these other sorts of things? How often do you walk? How often do you do all these other sorts of things? It's really important that you get into detail because that's something that is one of the first pieces of information that examiners look at is, what's the context behind this case? They'll also send you a work history report that will go into much more detail of your work history. So those things are important to have, and to send back in right away. Once they provide you that update and you've sent in your information, it will take your examiner about 1 to 3 weeks, or excuse me, 1 to 3 months to go through. And this is them making requests to your medical providers and to everyone that we listed in that initial process. And it's going to vary depending on the different healthcare providers. Like for example, UC Health is fantastic when it comes to applying for Social Security, not a UC Health plug. But they just send all of the information in, even if you have like specific doctors listed, as we kind of talked about before, don't do that. Send in just like hospitals. They will just send all the information without being asked. They just find it easier on their end. Whereas some other hospitals, or smaller clinics and whatnot, it takes a longer time for them to process that. So just depending on where it is throughout or what, clinic, whatnot you have, um, it can kind of change depending on that. But your examiner will go through and review those medical records, and then kind of move on to our next step. But Ty, go ahead.
Just want to say for the functional report and just the process as a whole, it's very depowering. A lot of people feel bullied. A lot of people hate how negative it is, how they can approach life with what makes them special, what makes them talented, what makes them good. A lot of the questions are like, why are you a failure? And it feels really hard and hurtful. My thought process for people who don't want to feel that way but are in need of these services is to approach the question more like, and they're not going to ask you this, so you have to think of like this. Where is it that you want to be in life, and why aren't you there? What has your disabilities done to slow you down and stopped you? There's a lot of people who, you know, they don't want to be on these benefits and they want to work. They've had 6 jobs in 5 months. There's something wrong there. And honestly, I've heard judges actually say that is a good indicator that we are letting these people down when they are working this hard and they're still not there. So it's not that you're a failure. It's that we're a community of people and that you just haven't had the support that you need. So I just want to, point out, if the functional report seems harsh, if it's hard to answer those questions because you don't want to think of it as a negative, don't think of it like where you should be, where you want to be, and why aren't you there? Thank you.
Hmm. Thank you, Ty. And that's really helpful kind of frame lens for folks to consider when they're filling out their function report because it sucks. I helped plenty of clients fill it out for a variety of different reasons, and it's not a fun conversation. People go into detail, and those are some of the longer conversations that I have with folks. But it is really important because, again, they don't, they have to just consider what the medical records exist and what those objectively say. And then this is really your way of giving your piece of it. And so it's almost backwards that this is like one of the places that you can really advocate for yourself on, but it's really important that these are filled out. Okay, now we'll get into consultative exams. So near the end of your examiner's review, they will likely request a consultative exam or a CE. CEs are free physical or mental medical exams ordered by DDS, so you don't pay a single dime out of these. They're scheduled when your file lacks enough evidence for them to make a disability decision. It's usually it's performed by an independent doctor, and it is mandatory for your claim to be active. I've seen plenty of folks go through and it's like, well, I don't want to do that. Like, technically, I don't have to do it, which technically you don't have to do anything, but your claim will get denied because you didn't attend that consultative exam. I would also always explain to folks, it's like, well, it doesn't make sense. They spent the last 3 months going over my detailed medical record, and those records are detailed. I've seen them printed out. They are whole, like, dictionary-size books. Like, what do you mean they don't have that? Well, it's looking at things that it may not have in there exactly. So let's say, for example, a lot of your something I'll tell folks a lot. Let's say your left arm is incapacitated, you aren't able to use your left arm. They may want to look at your right arm to see how you use it and how you compensate utilizing your right arm. That's an example that I give it a very basic kind of overview. Generally, these are pretty broad. Think of, especially for the broad ones, as physical. Think of them as like a general checkup. They'll want to check kind of a little bit of everything. But I've seen them, perform they'll do more intense like scans and whatnot. So there's a couple of different things that they have, really just looking at what they don't have in your medical records. Once those are completed, and it's good to know when you get a CD because you know that things are going to start wrapping up because they ordered this at the end. So once it's completed, decisions are usually anticipated within the next month or so, and you will, of course, get those decisions by mail. These will be decisions by Social Security, not through DDS. So initial decision approved or denied. So once your examiner completes the review, they will send their findings and recommendations over to Social Security for a final determination. And that's when you'll be notified again via mail. DDS, let me take a second. A lot of claims are denied at this stage. 70% of them on average are denied. And denials can be either medical or technical. A medical denial is that there's not enough evidence on file, and I put heavy quotations on that. And then technical is you do not qualify for this program or something else happened. So let's say you didn't go to a CE, you'll get a technical denial. Know that the EDS as Social Security guidelines are very, very strict. And so something I really want you to kind of take, not take away is, oh, well, I'm not disabled. Clearly, I'm just gaslighting myself. No, they deny for a variety of different reasons, and the reasons that they will give you in that initial paperwork, it's very vague. From my understanding, they give you a more in-depth overview of why they denied you at the hearings level, but it sucks. It really does suck. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but again, if it was a simple process, there wouldn't be a complex field of law in this field. And this is something I like to tell as a story just to really show that like it's kind of bonkers how they make their decisions sometimes. I had a client who was going through this process really rough. Importantly, they were a double amputee. No, nothing below, or it was like right above their knees was the cutoff for their legs, in a wheelchair, 24/7, all that sort of stuff. In the paperwork, in writing, it mentioned that the claimant could stand or walk for at least 15 minutes. It's a little wild, truth be told, some of the decisions that they make. So again, I really don't want folks to be discouraged because these denials, I don't know the reasonings behind them, but they are so out of whack 99.9% of the time. So what happens when you get denied? You should appeal. I always tell folks that you should appeal. I tried to do this very professionally, but this is something that just is really frustrating, and I get that. Um, but it's so important that you appeal your decision and you keep the case open. Because if you do not appeal, you will lose all of that progress. So if you decide, oh, I want to actually start over, you have to do that whole 3 to 6 month waiting period, and they have to get a whole new set of records because they don't keep that very long. And again, since it's a new case, they have to do a whole new process with that. So please, I beg, if you have started this process, continue the process. It is going to be a lot more helpful for you later down the line. Yes, Ty.
I just want to, along with your appeal, if you appeal, then you protect your protective filing date, which is what determines
Hmm.
your back pay. So if you start a new process, you might lose out on some money. If you appeal, then you protect that protective filing date, and that's going to help you reclaim more money than if you had just started the process over from the very beginning.
Thank you, Ty. I appreciate adding that on because that is super important and a really big thing that people will talk about is that initial application date. So reconsideration. So you have 65 days, 60 official days, and then 5 extra days for them to account for snail mail because that's what they rely on mostly. Um, of the date your letter was, or the date of your denial letter. So if it says, June 1st and you got it June 5th, the appeal deadline that you need is based off of June 1st. You can apply or do a reconsideration online. Every time that you make an appeal request, you can do that online, regardless whether it was SSDI or SSI, which is the nice part about reconsideration and hearings request, is that you don't have to worry about going in person to the Social Security office or anything like that. You can just appeal online. Once that appeal is submitted, Social Security will process it very similar to how they did with the initial and send it over for a new examiner within DDS to review your case. This process, generally, it's the same, but it is significantly faster because they have a majority of that evidence. Now, it still takes, I think the average is about 2 to 3 months to have you assigned to an examiner, so it's another period of waiting. But 3 months in compared to, 6, maybe more, it's certainly a lot faster of a turnaround time. And they do try to move those around, especially if you don't have a whole lot of updates from your initial application. So this process can go through pretty quickly. Yes, Ty.
I just want to say, particularly for whenever you get a denial, save everything you get from Social Security, including the envelope. I know a lot of people who get like their mail like a month and a half after the date marked on the envelope. And the only way to dispute that is the postmark date on the envelope. But if you have the envelope, then you can dispute it and you have additional time. So when dealing with Social Security or any bureaucracy system, save everything. Save all your documents, save all their documents. If you talk to them on the phone, write down who you talk to, the date and time. Document, document, document. That is your best protection.
Awesome. Thank you, Ty. Um, so again, this process is pretty similar to initial. Denials are a little bit higher on this stage. Excuse me. And that's because they're like, well, the last one denied and it changed. It's a whole lot of bureaucratic nonsense. But denials are pretty frequent on reconsideration as well. Stage three, request for hearing, is going to be kind of the big one when we think about law. And I will also note that usually for my clients at this point, this is when I would step away and hand it over to our paralegals and our hearing staff, and they would be the ones that kind of have more of that like understanding of how this process works. But similar to your request for reconsideration, you have 60 days plus 5 extra for snail mail to appeal your reconsideration denial to a hearing. This process is different because instead of going to DDS, you'll go to Social Security's Office of Hearings Operations, or OHO, where an administrative law judge will conduct hearings and issue decisions. I really do recommend that if you haven't gotten counsel by this point, that you should by now. Again, you're dealing with it while it's administrative law, it's different than like civil or criminal law. It's still, again, complex law. And there's a variety of different things that are different. That's hard to navigate and to go through. Again, I was in this process, or I was in this firm for a while, and there were parts of it that I was like, huh? I don't know. So it's a very complicated process. So if you can get an attorney, get one. And again, near the end, I'll go over some of the benefits of having an attorney. So I don't want to jump too far ahead. But request for hearing is really where me as a case manager want to push you to, is if I can get you to a hearing level as quickly and as efficiently as possible without compromising your case, I have succeeded as a case manager, because this is where we see the most approvals for cases. A lot of it is, again, DDS has a lot of really strict policies for them to make approvals. And even if a DDS examiner makes an approval and says, yep, this is good to go, Social Security will do a review of it and go, and they may say, we disagree with the examiner, we're going to deny the case. That's happened from time to time. Whereas for administrative law judges, they have a lot more flexibility to say, based off the evidence in front of me, this is an approval, pretty easy peasy. So that's why it's really important that you keep hope and that you appeal and that you fight this case continuing, because there is a strong chance for you. And as Ty mentioned, if you're able to protect your initial filing date, you start getting back pay from, if you've gone through this lengthy process, that entire time you are eligible for back pay. So that is something that is really, really, really beneficial. So, kind of as a general overview, I know we've kind of gone through a lot over the last couple of minutes, but the stages of the claim, the initial application process, which takes about 3 to 6 months, roughly 70% of denials happen in there. Request for reconsideration appeal, again, it's about 2 to 4 months. It's a little bit shorter, and then roughly 80% from what I was able to find by statistics get denied. Request for hearing, that can be a little different because again, you're working with a judge's schedule. Based off of my records, it can take about 8 to 10 months to get in a hearing date. Again, depending on a variety of different circumstances. And again, it's not something that I'm not as familiar on. But again, at that point, representation is recommended. And again, that's where most approvals occur. If you do get denied at the hearings level, there's kind of one of two paths that you have, and which one is best for you, you have to consult an attorney with. I'm not even comfortable saying like, oh, like you should do one or the other. Again, I'm just providing this information just to show you what happens next. So I call these courts of last resort. If you get denied at a hearings level, you can appeal to the Social Security Appeals Council. This is rarely used, and approvals are very rare at this level. You could also, if they get denied at that level, then you can take it to district court. But again, that is something that's very rarely used and very difficult. There are some Social Security law firms who will represent you at an appeals council. Most disability law firms will say, I'm tapped out for federal district court, and you'll have to consult another attorney, but they will give you recommendations on who to go to for that. Most folks would recommend starting over. Again, what's best for your case if you're at that situation is going to be dependent based off you and if you have legal counsel. So general things about the process. Before you apply for SSDI, check your SSDI amount. Social Security will kind of freeze it, not as like a total frozen, but as just the showing you how much you can benefit by that point. So that's helpful just again, have a nice idea. Once your claim is at DDS, don't drop off things at your local Social Security office or call for a check-in. They're going to tell you it's at DDS. I don't know the status of your claim. And Social Security, again, because there's a law, it can take a long time to get a hold of an agent. They're going to tell you, I don't have an update for you. So ask DDS if once it's been assigned to them for updates. If you change your address or if there's a change to your housing situation, notify Social Security immediately. Also notify your attorney if you have one. Any changes regarding contact information, housing, etc. Because again, Social Security will contact you primarily through mail. So if you have to change it to a PO box, let them know right away so that they can send that information to you as soon as possible. And of course, always meet your deadlines and attend your CEs if and when they are scheduled. So really quickly, I want to go over why legal representation is helpful. And this is definitely a more dense version. But one, nobody knows bureaucratic nightmares like disability law attorneys. They can help you on a variety of different things, such as filing out paperwork with Social Security. They can help you out with applications, filing your function and work report, all of that. They can provide you updates on your claim. Um, for example, when I would call, I would be able to get updates from the lady and was able to get a ton of information from that. The lady at the front desk for DDS, she's very sweet. Additionally, my job as a case manager was to advocate for you to DDS and Social Security. It can be very intimidating to talk to Social Security and your examiner, and they may tell you information that's not entirely correct. Having somebody who understands that process and knows what type of questions to ask for can be fantastic. Because if they try and give, for example, if I had a client who's having issues and I call them, they're like, and they give me an answer that is not correct, I have the know-how and the knowledge to say, nope, that is not correct. How are you going to fix this problem? I would tell folks all the time when I was going through it, it is my job to be on hold for an hour with Social Security so that you don't have to. Um, and that's something that I know folks get really frustrated on is response times and all of that. That's my job. I know Ty also mentioned it earlier with documentation. Every good lawyer will keep really great, fantastic documentation. My all of my case notes that I had for all the cases I had were depthful. They had huge notes from phone call logs, who I talked to, all of that sort of stuff. It was really helpful, so that way my clients didn't have to worry about that. But of course, I always recommend that folks keep mail and all of that, do a lot of that. But the amount of documentation that attorneys are able to hold on to versus your average Joe is really important. Additionally, if you have questions about this process, your case manager, legal assist, advocate, attorneys, whoever, they're able to provide you a ton of information and resources and so many different things. Another thing that I know folks have questions on, is how do I pay an attorney? I don't want to get an attorney if I have to pay, hand over foot and all of that. Under federal law, disability law firms are contingency based, meaning that there's no upfront costs and they don't get anything unless you win. So if you go throughout this entire process and you're constantly denied, they're still going to be with you. They're not going to ask you for like payment at the end of that. Like, oh, well, you lost, give me money. They're legally not required to do that. If successful, the fee, how law firms get paid is regulated through federal law, and it is 25% of your past due benefits or your back pay up to $9,200, whichever is smaller. So if you got, let's say an SSI case, for example, and again, that cap is only 991, it's going to be about 25% of that fee that's taken. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But I know that kind of sounds like a lot, and it kind of is. But this cap is the same regardless of if you start a claim with a disability lawyer versus if you get one at the very end. So I always tell folks it's better to invest and have an advocate who can help you through the initial reconsideration and hearing stages than just at the end. I understand why folks want to get them at the end, but there's so much that disability attorneys can do and the relationships that offices have with Social Security that really does benefit in the long run. There's a couple of different organizations and law firms that exist in Colorado. Most I would recommend getting an attorney within Colorado. There's other disability law firms that exist throughout the state of the United States. And of course, they can do it. It's the same sort of stuff, but each DDS is different. Each Social Security office is different. As I mentioned before, I had clients who were out of state, and I had to figure out which DDS office was the right one because maybe they had multiple, or which Social Security office they had. And talking to them was very different than it was for Colorado. So I always recommend to do that. There are two organizations that are really great starting points: the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, or NOSCR, and the National Association of Disability Representatives, or NADAR. They are great starting points for referrals. NOSCR is like a specialized bar that is specifically focused on that, and NADAR is also. It's like a specialized association. Um, their referral phone numbers are in here, but if you can always go to their website, and they will have great referrals for folks throughout this. You're not alone in this process. There are a lot of incredible advocates who are here to help you and to help you go through this process. So please, please, please utilize those resources. They are there for you. Okay. Kind of starting to wrap up now. As Ty mentioned a little bit early on, after you get approved, what will happen is a continuing disability review. These occur every 1, 3, 5, and 7 years, and it basically is a Social Security agent will go through and make sure that you are still eligible for it, essentially. So they will go through, get updates, as kind of mentioned, if you stop seeking treatment after a while, like after you get approved, that can be an issue, all that sort of stuff. So once you get approved, it's really important that obviously, to maintain yourself, go through, keep seeking treatment and all of that, but it's also important for when these reviews come up. If you get a review, most reviews, they will say, yep, you're good to go. No real issue there. Usually once you're in the system, they're a lot more okay with things and more understanding on things. If you do get denied, you have about 10 days, you can make an appeal of that denial. And when you do, ask for benefit continuation while under appeal within 10 days of receiving that. Representation is preferred. It can be a little tricky, just because, again, that's another legal field. So if you had an attorney at that point, excuse me, reach out to your previous attorney. If this is something that they aren't able to assist on, then they will be able to find you a referral and send you over to another group that can provide you that representation and provide you that assistance. But I know, at least with the firm that I worked with, they would have one of the attorneys help out with disability reviews and all of that sort of stuff. How to avoid CDR denials. As I kind of mentioned, keep up your documentation while maintaining treatment. That if you decide to go back to work, follow Social Security's rules by obtaining benefits planning. And then Social Security has a red book that talks about their work incentives and benefits planning as well. I have that on our thing, but you can always look up Social Security Red Book or Social Security Benefits Planning, and that's going to be helpful. I also believe that information is also in the My SSA app as well. So there's a couple of different ways that you can access this information. And that is it. Thank you for spending the last roughly hour with me and Ty, as we've talked about the really fun prospect of Social Security disability law. I hope that this was informative and kind of gives you, again, a quick glimpse as to the complexity of Social Security law.